It was a cold, gray morning in the quiet Northern California village of Eldon. Hollow, the kind of day where the mist clung low to the pine trees, and even the birds seemed hesitant to sing. Father Elias Maro stood alone on the stone steps of the long-abandoned St. Denis Chapel, his breath fogging in the air. The place hadn't seen a service in almost 3 decades, yet the heavy wooden doors still loomed with quiet authority. He had come back because something never sat right, not back then, and not now. In 1984, nuns disappeared from this very chapel, without a trace. Sister Therese, Sister Beatrice, Sister Mildred, and Sister Joan. It was the kind of story that once sent shockwaves through the small Catholic community and left villagers whispering behind closed doors. A full police search was launched. Numbered bodies, no blood, no broken windows, just for faithful women who seemed to vanish into thin air. The chapel was locked from the inside. The tea was still warm. Their beds were left unmade. It was as if they had been plucked straight from the earth by invisible hands. The story made the local papers for a while, then faded. Life moved on. The chapel was decommissioned, and Silas Redwood, a wealthy landowner with ties to county officials, purchased the surrounding property, including the church. Within weeks, the chapel was torn down. No one questioned it. Not deeply anyway. Redwood said he was preserving the land. But Father Elias never believed that, because one of those missing women was his younger sister, Sister Elias Maro. He had tried, back then, pushed the diocese for more action, spoke to investigators, prayed endlessly. But the leads dried up, the trail went cold, and eventually, the world moved on. Only he didn't. Not really. And now, 28 years later, he stood here again, older, slower, with snow in his beard, but still haunted by the same question. What happened to them? It started again with a voice. A soft voice, singing. That's what the children from the nearby school said. They had been playing near the edge of Redwood's land when they heard it. A woman's voice singing a Latin hymnal one their age should have known. Salve, Regina, they whispered, mimicking the strange, mournful melody. The teacher thought it was a prank, until she heard it too. Father Elias came out the very next day. He knew the hymn. It was one Sister Therese used to sing when she cleaned the chapel floors. He remembered her voice clearly. Kind, steady, always drifting in and out like a breeze. He followed the children's footsteps to the old chapel grounds, where nothing remained but overgrown grass and a few sunken stones. Then he saw it, a small metal grate tucked low to the ground, half covered in moss. A vent, and from it, faintly but unmistakably, came the sound of coughing, followed by a whisper, "Help me." He stumbled back, heart pounding. Was someone alive down there? He contacted the sheriff's department, urging them to investigate. Deputy Williams, a younger man with a skeptical but patient demeanor, agreed to meet him at the site. Together, they listened. Nothing at first, just wind and silence, but then singing, soft and clear. A voice. Deputy Williams's eyes changed. He radioed in backup. They confronted Silas Redwood that afternoon. The man was as polished as ever, jogging clothes on, German shepherd at his side, all charm and cold smiles. "This is my land," he said, voice tightening. "There is nothing here but dirt and trees. Whatever that priest is hearing, it's in his head." But the deputies insisted. They wanted to search the property. Redwood refused, said it was private, said he'd sue. So they got a warrant. While they waited for it to be approved, Father Elias stayed with Harold, an old groundskeeper from St. Denis, who had stayed in Eldon Hollow after the chapel was shut down. Harold remembered the days when the sisters used to serve the community, delivering food, running the small village school, tending to the elderly. He, too, had never believed they just left. Over cups of strong tea in Harold's small cabin, Father Elias learned more. In 1983, a few years after the chapel was destroyed, there had been reports of nighttime construction near the woods, strange humming sounds, machinery, vibrations strong enough to rattle windows, but nothing came of it. Officials dismissed it as minor seismic activity. Redwood's word was gold back then. He'd donated to every election campaign, every town fundraiser. No one wanted to question him. By nightfall, the emergency warrant came through. Father Elias and Harold watched from a distance as a convoy of vehicles approached Redwood's property. Flashing lights cut through the dusk. Officers fanned out, some entering the house, others heading toward the tree-lined trail that once led to the chapel. And there, tucked behind an old storage shed, they found the stairs, hidden beneath new boards, The officers uncovered a stone staircase leading downward into the earth. Cold air rose from the hole, and the singing stopped. They went down with flashlights and cameras, their body cams feeding the footage live to a tablet in Deputy Williams's vehicle. Father Elias watched, his hands trembling, as the light revealed a narrow tunnel, carved stone, wooden supports, signs of deliberate construction. The officers moved forward cautiously. Then the camera turned, and everyone fell silent. There, on the screen, lying on a thin mattress in a small stone chamber, was a woman, gaunt, pale, with hollow cheeks and silver-streaked hair cropped short. Her eyes blinked slowly against the light, and her lips moved. "Help me," she whispered again. Deputy Williams crouched beside her. "Ma'am, what's your name?" "Sister. Sister Elias Maro." Father Elias gasped, gripping the edges of the tablet. Harold stood frozen beside him. It was her alive. After 28 years, what followed was a blur. Paramedics were called in. A stretcher brought down. Officers fanned out to search the rest of the tunnels. They found carvings etched into the walls, crosses, saints, prayers, all handmade, bits of wood and fabric woven into rosaries, a sanctuary in darkness. And in the far corner of the chamber, beneath a tattered blanket, they found bones, human remains. Another sister, perhaps Beatrice, gone many years. Her sister Therese was lifted into the ambulance, her eyes opened enough to meet her brother's. "God never left me," she whispered. Silas Redwood, once untouchable, was arrested that night. But that wasn't the end, because as the officers continued searching, they uncovered another hidden door, and behind it another chamber, and in it, something no one was prepared for. The body cam feed went dark before they could see what it was. Father Elias stood frozen in the cold night air, his heart hammering, knowing that whatever they found next would change everything. A heavy stillness settled over the village of Eldon Hollow after that long night. Though dawn crept in slowly through the fog and pine trees, the people weren't waking to the usual calm of rural life. Whispers passed from porch to porch, from gas station to cafe, each one growing a little louder. "They found her, the missing nun. She's alive." It was the kind of news that didn't just shake a town. It rewrote its history. Father Elias Maro hadn't slept. Not really. He sat in the sterile ICU waiting room, hands folded tight, eyes red but alert. Every now and then, nurses moved through quietly. They offered tea, a blanket, updates. But all he could think about was that voice, his sister's voice. After nearly 3 decades of silence, and that second chamber, the one the officers found after the cameras cut out, Deputy Williams finally returned to the hospital, face drawn and pale. He sat beside Father Elias without a word at first. Then, slowly, he spoke. "We found more remains. Human. Likely sister, Joan or Mildred, was still working to confirm. But Father," he hesitated. "There was something else." Father Elias turned, his breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just remains. There were records, journals, dozens of notebooks stored in crates, most written in neat, methodical handwriting, all by Silas Redwood. Elias leaned forward, listening as the deputy explained what they'd discovered, disturbing details of years of observation, obsession, and secrecy. Redwood had tracked the routines of the nuns for months before the disappearance in 1980. He had drawn maps of the chapel, noted when the sisters were alone, when deliveries were made, even when confessions were scheduled. And then, one chilling line stood out, written in a slightly shakier hand. 4 will go down, 1 will remain, the voice of God will answer through her. He believed your sister was chosen, Williams said carefully, that her prayers, her devotion, somehow justified keeping her alive. Father Elias's eyes burned with anger. She wasn't some symbol to him. She was a woman, a servant of God, and he caged her like an animal. The conflict at the center of it all began to crystallize. It wasn't just about the missing nuns anymore. It was about what Silas Redwood represented, a man who wore wealth and respectability like armor, who had hidden behind charity dinners and civic donations while committing unthinkable harm, and no one saw it, or maybe some did, and said nothing. Back in Eldon Hollow, the townspeople wrestled with guilt. At the local diner, older folks remembered strange things. The lights on late at Redwood's estate, heavy trucks rumbling down the back road at night, the demolition of the chapel being so sudden. But no one had ever dared speak up. Redwood had been too powerful. He had friends in law enforcement, at City Hall, even a seat on the board of a local charity. And then there was Harold, the former groundskeeper, who'd remained quietly devoted to the memory of the nuns. For years he had kept a trunk in his attic, with small items from the old chapel, a brass bell clapper, candle holders, Sister Teresa's worn Bible. That trunk became the center of attention now. Among its contents was an old Polaroid, dated 2 weeks before the disappearance. The photo showed all 4 sisters, smiling outside the chapel door. Therese held a basket of herbs. Beatrice had flour on her apron. Mildred's knitting sat on her lap. Joan waved at the camera. Ordinary, peaceful. I never believed they ran off. Harold told the reporters gathering near his front fence. They were the heart of this village. They gave more than they ever took. Meanwhile, Redwood remained in custody, refusing to speak. His lawyer, flown in from San Francisco, argued mental illness. He's not fit to stand trial, the man told the press, shielding his client's reputation behind a wall of legal jargon. But Deputy Williams and his team pressed on. Behind the scenes, more investigators arrived. Forensic experts combed the tunnel system. A historian from the diocese came to examine the carvings, many of which were direct copies of 12th century religious art. She kept her mind sharp by remembering scripture. One said, referring to Sister Therese, she recreated the saints, not with paint, but with memory. As the story deepened, new subplots emerged. One of the notebooks recovered from the second chamber contained letters, unsent and unaddressed. Some were prayers, others were written to family, but a few were to another figure entirely. To the man who put me here, one began, I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I must stay whole. You cannot break my spirit. That belongs to God. The investigators were stunned. After all, she endured. Sister Therese had remained spiritually intact. Her writings were even poetic at times. Reflections on hope, on the cycles of dawn and darkness. She had counted the seasons by changes in the air. I know it is spring, she wrote once, because the breeze smells like flowers again. Back at the hospital, her condition slowly stabilized. Dr. Chen, the lead physician, reported her weight was improving, though it would be a long recovery. She's speaking more now, the doctor told Father Elias. But she's very fragile. She tires quickly. Still, she insists on praying every morning. Father Elias was finally allowed longer visits. He sat by her bedside, reading psalms, holding her hand when she slept. She told him things she hadn't told anyone else. The early years underground, how she sang to keep from losing her voice. How Sister Beatrice had kept her strong until the sickness came. She died in my arms, Therese whispered one evening. I buried her with my rosary. She said it would help her find the light. The emotional weight of her words settled heavy on Elias. And yet, there was strength behind them. A faith deeper than explanation. But just when things seemed to quiet down, something new surfaced. A contractor working with a forensic team discovered an old hatch beneath the chapel's original foundation, a locked iron panel buried under decades of dirt and moss. It hadn't been opened in years. When pried open, it revealed yet another chamber, this one entirely sealed off. Inside were wooden crates, sealed and marked with strange symbols. It wasn't just a place for hiding people. It was a vault. Within those crates were more journals. But these weren't written by Redwood. They were older, much older. One dated back to 1962, referencing the construction of a sacred space below the sanctuary for spiritual retreat and silence. Another bore the name of a long-deceased bishop. A third contained blueprints of the entire underground system. A new mystery had just been uncovered. Had the tunnels existed before Redwood ever came into the picture? Father Elias sat in the sheriff's office, flipping through a brittle leather-bound book filled with faded ink and Latin passages. A diagram showed the chapel and beneath it, multiple chambers, storage areas, even a contemplative cell. This wasn't just Redwood's doing. Someone had built beneath the chapel, long before the nuns disappeared. Suddenly, the story was no longer just about a single man's crime. It stretched deeper, back into the village's past, into the very foundation of the faith community. Why had the diocese sold the property so quickly after the disappearance? What had they known? Deputy Williams contacted the bishop's office in Sacramento again. Requests for old records, archived letters, anything. And a strange pattern began to emerge. Every 20 to 30 years, a nun had disappeared from this region, always under mysterious circumstances, always when records were sparse, never solved. And now, one had returned, carrying not just a testimony of survival, but possibly the key to unlocking a far older secret. The deeper they dug, the more tangled It became what began as a miracle might just become a reckoning. And as Father Elias prepared for another visit with his sister, a new question weighed heavy in his mind. What if finding her was only the beginning? For the next several days, Father Elias barely left his sister's side. Each morning he sat with her as sunlight filtered softly through the hospital curtains. He would read scripture aloud, sometimes psalms, sometimes from letters the sisters had written to each other, fragments of faith stitched together through memory and time. Sister Terry's grew stronger in body, but the real healing happened somewhere deeper. Despite all she'd endured in silence, she remained calm, humble, even forgiving. She never once spoke of revenge or bitterness. Her words were gentle. Her voice, when it returned fully, carried the same grace she had known before her disappearance in 1980. But even as the healing began, the storm outside grew louder. Media attention exploded. Headlines called her the miracle nun. Reporters camped outside the hospital and City Hall. Eldon Hollow, once a sleepy village, became the center of national attention. The community was divided. Some demanded answers from church leadership. Others wrestled with guilt. How had so many signs been missed? How could Silas Redwood live among them all those years, hiding not just one secret, but many? The pressure mounted on the bishop's office. Then, at a press conference, the diocese spokesperson stepped forward and confirmed what Father Elias feared most. Yes, she said carefully. Records showed that underground chambers were commissioned in the late 1950s as part of an experimental spiritual retreat model. They were later abandoned. We regret that information was not made public when the property was sold in the 1980s. It was a revelation that sent ripples through the faith community. The hidden tunnels weren't just Redwood's idea. They had been there all along. Forgotten, sealed, but never truly gone. Still, it didn't excuse what happened. Redwood had turned a sacred place into a prison. He had twisted what was once holy into something cruel. His trial, which began months later, was one of the most watched in California's history. Dozens of charges were filed: unlawful imprisonment, aggravated assault, desecration of sacred ground, and obstruction of justice. The recovered journals were presented in court, along with forensic evidence and survivor testimony. Father Elias took the stand, not just as a brother, but as a priest. His words were clear. No institution, no person, no legacy is too sacred to question when justice is at stake. Redwood showed little remorse. He sat motionless throughout the proceedings, expression blank, his once sharp features drawn and hollow. When the verdict finally came guilty on all counts, the courtroom erupted in a mix of quiet tears and murmured prayers. For the village of Eldon Hollow, it marked the beginning of true reckoning. Sister Terry's chose not to attend the trial. She said she had lived through enough darkness. Instead, she spent her days slowly regaining strength, learning to walk again, adjusting to the world that had changed so drastically since she last saw it. Her hospital room became a place of quiet reflection, often filled with flowers, prayer cards, and letters from people all over the world, many sharing how her survival gave them hope. And one morning, almost a year after she was found, Father Elias wheeled her out into the hospital garden. Spring was in full bloom, the air full of color and life. Birds sang from the pines overhead. It was peaceful, simple, just the kind of moment she had dreamed of. During all those years underground, I still see them, she said softly, gazing at the sky. Beatrice, Joan, Mildred. I see their faces when I pray. I hear their voices in the wind. I know, Elias replied, his voice thick. They're with God now. I used to wonder why I was left behind, she whispered, why I lived, and they didn't. But maybe it was so someone would remember. So someone would tell the truth. You did more than survive, Elias said gently. You gave the world back its faith. That same week, the diocese announced plans to rebuild a chapel on the site where the original one stood. But this time, it would be different. Not a hidden space. Not a secret retreat. A place of light and openness. With a memorial garden dedicated to the 4 nuns who vanished in 1980. Their names would be etched in stone for all to see. The village of Eldon Hollow changed. To what was once shame and silence gave way to dialogue, and healing townspeople came together for candlelight vigils, remembering not just the sisters, but others who had suffered in silence. It became a symbol of how faith, even when tested, could rise again. Father Elias returned to St. Agnes eventually, though he visited Terry's often. She moved into a small home near the coast, surrounded by nurses and friends from the church. She never gave interviews, never sought attention. but she welcomed those who needed comfort. Survivors, seekers, even doubters. She listened, she prayed with them. And sometimes, when the moment was right, she would smile and say, "God never left me, not once." The story of the 4 village nuns, how they vanished in 1980, and how one of them was found alive 28 years later, continued to ripple through hearts and headlines. It reminded people that no story is ever fully over, that truth finds a way to rise, and that even in the darkest tunnels, a single candle of faith can survive. Because sometimes, it's not about how long the silence lasts, it's about what breaks it.